Hi, Dr. P here to talk about sequencing in war games, whether turn-based, real-time, or simultaneous. This is one of the fundamental choices in games, one of those 10 fundamental structures that I've identified that are in all games. You've got to have some kind of sequence, whether you do it automatically because you don't think of alternatives or whether you think about the alternatives carefully. Most war games fall into one of two ways of governing the sequence of play: turn-based, which is typical of tabletop games, and real-time, which is common in video games, especially real-time strategy, although lots of video games are also, or instead, turn-based. A third method is simultaneous adjudication, which combines aspects of the first two. Classic tabletop games like chess and Go and so on are all turn-based as a practical matter. So we'll talk first about turn-based. This is typical of brainware games, where the primary activity is thinking. It's really difficult to implement real-time in tabletop games. It's pretty difficult to implement simultaneous. It's easy to implement turn-based. Turn-based sequencing gives players time to think, but also gives them the opportunity for analysis paralysis, where they think and think and think and never come to a decision. Turn-based also results in downtime, which is time between turns when the players who aren't taking their turn have little to do. Now, there are ways to divide turn-based into small increments, as in committed intent games, but still, at some point, one player is acting and the others are not. Of course, players can also be given opportunities to interrupt a player's turn, such as reinforcing an attack location or playing an interrupt card that causes something to happen. Real-time tends to turn anything into athletic-ware. There's the classic notion that you need to do 200 actions per minute to succeed in StarCraft. What real-time mightily discourages is analysis paralysis, because in real-time, you snooze, you lose. You can't wait. Unfortunately, that means that real-time discourages logical thinking and encourages use of stopgaps or quicker ways such as intuition, heuristics, and trained reactions. Heuristics are rules of thumb that cover many situations, so you don't have to think about it, just apply the heuristic. Training, you confront a situation you've seen before and you've practiced what you should do, and so you react without thought. Intuition is coming to a conclusion without knowing an explicit logical path. It might be called gut feeling, although there are some differences between intuition and gut feeling, because the gut feeling could be purely emotional, whereas intuition, we hope, has some logical basis in there somewhere. Now, simultaneous adjudication allows players to think and make up their turns before the adjudication, but then the moves are all resolved at once. Well, that reduces downtime. It's most famously implemented in Diplomacy, the board game, as far back as 1959. The first video game I saw that used simultaneous adjudication but not real time was Eastern Front by Chris Crawford on the Atari 400-800. It's hard to implement on the tabletop. It's much easier in video games because the computer can do the adjudication quite quickly. Game of Thrones, the board game, is one attempt to get near simulplay without needing to write anything down. And you can think about combinations. Turn-based with interrupts approaches simultaneous. Committed intent and other methods that divide the turn into small increments also attempt to approach simultaneous. Shenandoah's two-player war games allowed you to move just one area's occupants at a time and then keep track of what you had moved so you couldn't move them again during the turn. And that was another attempt to combine things together. In a game I recently devised, which is about fantasy space battles, believe it or not, a player can choose to move a ship or can have a ship shoot in each play, and it alternates back and forth. Each ship can only move once during the round, can only shoot once during the round. So it's highly interactive between the two players or four players playing partners. Of course, games can use different sequences at different junctures. For example, independent combat is usually simultaneously adjudicated. And real-time more or less incorporates simo-adjudication without the available thinking time. Is any one of these better? Well, turn-based is artificial, but easy to implement. The more players you have, the less desirable turn-based is because the downtime increases. If you have 5 players, 4 players are waiting for 1 player to move, and a player only gets to move essentially 1/5 of the time, so downtime is increased. As I've said, real-time is hard to implement on tabletop, and as it's usually implemented, it tends to become a race as much as anything else. Who can give the most orders fastest? And that's true whether it's tabletop or video. Simultaneous is desirable for wargames, of course, as it combines thought with a more realistic adjudication than turn-based. But it's a lot easier to do on video games than on tabletop. One of the oddities I've run into in working with video games is reading that Civilization 4, when it was programmed, was originally simultaneous and they had to turn it into a turn-based game. I don't really understand why they did that, I guess to make it easier. However good one method or another may be, which one you use is going to depend on the kind of game that you're making. Thanks for listening.